to Bell's Palsy Knowledge Base. Today's episode is called Bell's Palsy, the story of a broken cable. In one of the previous episodes we have discussed that our facial nerve can be easily compared to a thick telephone cable that supplies signals to a neighborhood. So it divides on his way to cover various areas and provide them with the signals. Same goes with the facial nerve. It has several nerve branches that supply signals to mimetic muscles. Let's take a closer look at those branches. Starting from the top. The top one is a temporal branch. It goes more or less like this. You can see it on the picture. And it supplies the mimetic signals to frontal muscle, procerus muscle or the frown muscle, corrugatus superclei, the muscles that put our eyebrows together, and the upper part of the circular muscle of the eye. Next one is the zygomatic branch. It goes more or less like this. You can see it also on the picture. And it provides the signals to the lower part of the circular muscle of the eye, to our lower eyelid. Also to the nasal muscle that makes our nose rimple. Also the muscle that elevates the upper lip, the levator labii superioris. And partly also innervates zygomatic muscles, the minor and major zygomatic muscles. This is what we usually call the smile group that participate in the smile. Next one is the buccal branch. Goes more or less like this horizontally. It provides mimetic signals to the upper part of the circular muscle of the mouth, to the levator anguli oris, so the muscle which lifts up the mouth corner. Also to risorius muscle, the smile muscle. We discussed about it in one of the previous episodes, and that muscle, risorius, provides for the small dimple in the chin when a person smiles. As we remember, this muscle is not always active in all persons. Marginal mandibular branch goes more or less like this, and it supplies innervation to the depressor anguli oris, the muscle that depresses the mouth corner, and the chin muscle, musculus mentalis. And the very last one that we will discuss very briefly is the neck branch. Goes more or less like this and supplies innervation to a broad but very thin superficial neck muscle, which is called platysma. When Bell palsy happens, all the branches sustain damages either from mechanical compression or from disrupted blood supply. We can compare it like if the thick telephone cable is getting damaged just after leaving the telephone station. In the case of facial nerve, it happens almost all the time here inside the pyramid of the temporal bone. There is a very thin and pretty curved complex channel where the facial nerve is running. And this channel is the longest bone channel in our body. It's about 33 millimeters in the adult, and it's very thin. Therefore, inside that channel, our facial nerve is very, very vulnerable. So as it goes in one big bundle from the compression, all the branches which are still inside the trunk of the cable sustain damages. So the regeneration speed of each branch can be different. Why? Because as we remember from previous episodes, there are 10,000 fibers inside the facial nerve. It's like a grass. For example, if you cut the grass, if you move the lawn, then each individual grass piece will grow at its own speed. Same goes with the fibers of facial nerve. Each of them will grow at its own pace depending on several conditions. Therefore, not every muscle regains its functionality at the same time. Very often, the first one to move will be either the eyelid or the mouth corner. It can vary from person to person, and one cannot tell in advance which muscles will regain their function first, because, as we just said, it depends very much on the regeneration of the facial nerve fibers, and that is difficult to predict. Sometimes, and most of the time, in my experience, The last one to regain movement is the forehead muscle. I don't know why it happens, but statistically, in majority of the patients, the forehead muscle regains its function as the last. So the eyebrow is somewhat late with recovering its functions. The reason of that is not known to me, but it is just statistics. We have discussed the construction of a neuron, motor neuron, in the first episode of our series. Now let's take a closer look at the individual damage that happens to neuron cell during the Bell's palsy. As you remember, the nerve cell, motor neuron, consists of three main parts: soma, the body, the dendrites, the connecting parts, and the long wire, which is called axon. That wire connects the body of the cell and the muscle, and it is a conductor of the signals between the brain and the mimetic muscles. As a nerve fiber, axon is part of a living cell, it is susceptible to damage due to compression or to disrupted blood supply. Why? If the blood supply stops for whatever reason, then the oxygen, water and other nutrients do not arrive to the scene, so the nerve tissue sort of suffocates. Of course, CO2 and other metabolic products are not evacuated, so we have a damage. Also, within a compression, the first thing that gets damaged is the myelin sheath. The myelin sheath is a part of a living cells, which are called Schwann cells. They are like beads on a string. They are protecting, they're hanging, so to say, on the axon and protecting it electrically from losing the signal that is going along the axon. These Schwann cells die first. That's why it is very important within the first 1 to 3 days to remove the damaging factor, because if it remains on the scene, then the damage to the axon will be more deep and the recovery will take much longer time. If we succeed to remove the damaging factor within relatively short time, 1 to 3 days, then the recovery will most likely to take place, full spontaneous recovery will most likely to take place within 3 to 5 weeks. During that period, the Schwann cells that have been damaged can regenerate, so new Schwann cells will grow. They will again put themselves around the non-damaged axon, which is a wire, and then the function of the axon and then the function of the nerve, consisting of all those 10,000 axons, will be regained. If the damaging factor persists for longer than 4 to 6 days, so the axon, the wire, left without any protection from the myelin, dies. But we have to remember very clearly, it's not that the whole nerve cell dies, because the soma, the body of the cell, is hidden inside the brain. What gets damaged and dies is only the peripheral part of the axon. So from this site of damage, which is more or less here, to the facial muscles. That part degenerates as being cleared up by our immune system. Macrophages come on scene, eat up all the dead tissue of the axon and leave the place. After that, the axon, the damaged axon, have to regenerate all the way inside the tube of endonerium. We know what endonerium is the first outside tube that protects mechanically our nerve fiber from mechanical damage. It still remains intact because it's a connecting tissue, it's not a living cell as such, so it remains. So the axon will grow back slowly until it reaches its proper muscle fiber. So this process can take up to 3 months. Why? Because on average, in the best possible conditions, it has been scientifically researched and proven that the axon can regenerate not more than 1 millimeter per day. Approximate distance between the site of damage, most probable site of damage, which is here, to the facial muscles is about 9 to 10 centimeters, which is 90 to 100 millimeters, which means each millimeter one day is 90 to 100 days, which makes essentially 3 months. That's why if after 3 to 6 days the damaging factor persists, like is very much the case in the case of Ramsay Hunt herpes virus or otitis media, where the inflammation is very intensive and all bacterial infection is still present, whatever we may want to do, it will not switch our nerve back overnight. This is very important to understand, because it becomes a very frustrating issue for the Bell's palsy sufferers who still expect and want to find the magic remedy to switch back the nerve. We have to understand this is like the moved grass. Once it has been moved, it has to regrow. There is no way it will regain its height within 1 or 2 days. So this is important. We need to be patient and to help our body to recover the damages, and we can expect the first movements to reappear within 2 to 3 months after the attack of the Bell's palsy. As soon as the damage to the facial nerve has occurred, our body starts to regenerate the damaged axons. It has to regrow all those 10,000 axons, out of which 7,000 are motor neurons. Motor neurons take the longest time to recover. The neurons that supply our taste sensors and our tear gland tissue with electrical signals, they have smaller distance to regrow, so they recover much quicker. But the motor neurons take longer time. But along with the growth of the motor neuron, also the myelin sheath, so this electric insulation, has to regrow also. Which means that the small cells, Schwann cells, the baby Schwann cells, have to grow, have to wrap them around the growing axon shaft, and then to solidify, to provide proper insulation. When the first fibers of regenerating axons start to reach our facial muscles, we start feeling twitching, itching, some sensations, vibrations, and all those feelings which are very normal for the recovery period, which is good, which is a good sign. Long before the normal mimetic movements reappear, the tone, or the tonus in Latin, of the facial muscles returns. That is why most of the time first comes the normal symmetrical appearance in the neutral state, so without movements. It means that the tone of the muscles have returned, and the actual movements start to come back only later. Why it happens that way is because the muscle fibers that provide for the tone and the muscle fibers that provide for the movements are different in their construction. Respectively, also the nerve fibers, so the axons that provide electric signals to those two types of muscles, they are different in their construction. The nerve fibers, the axons that provide tonic muscles, they are thinner. They don't need so much insulation from the myelin sheath, because the signals that they send to the muscles don't have to go that quickly. The tone, it's there and it stays. But the nerve fibers that provide our movement muscles with the signal have to be much thicker, and the electric insulation has to be thicker as well. Why? Because the signals of contraction and relaxation have to pass from the brain to the muscles very, very quickly, so we can make our movements, facial movements, dynamic and give our message in the proper way. As I mentioned before, the nerve fibers regenerate pretty slowly, 1 millimeter per day. At first, the regeneration process goes very quickly. So after the first movements have appeared, then the progress goes quite noticeably. After a few months, it eventually slows down, and at a certain moment, sometimes it's after 7, 8, 9 months, there is an impression that nothing changes anymore. It is only partly correct, because the regeneration process never stops completely. However, it slows down. And actually some of the nerve fibers will stop regrowing halfway. Their colleagues, so to say, from the same branch will reach their muscle fibers and re-innervate them, and these muscle fibers will become functional. But those who have not reached their muscles cannot supply the necessary signaling. Due to this reason, we have a controversy. On the one side, the muscle is weaker than it is normally. On the other hand, this muscle can become contractured. Why? Because those part of the nerve fibers that have regrown and re-innervated part of the muscle fibers, they're trying to do the job of the whole muscle. It's like instead of having 10 workers in the team, you have only 4, and those 4 have to do the job of all the 10. So those 4, they are overworked. And when the muscle fibers are overworked, they are contracted, or simply said, can become cramped. So for this reason, to facilitate the regeneration, not to let it stop halfway, it is very important to do gentle facial massages from the day 1 through the whole process of regeneration. There is a very deep reason for that. When we may do the facial massage, our brain through the trigeminal nerve receives sensory signals from the facial tissue and also from the facial muscles. So we send messages to our brain that our muscles, although they are not still fully functioning, they are active. So the brain knows, let's say, so his soldier is alive, he keeps fighting, so the brain as a command point keeps sending him supplies, support, reinforcements and so on. This is the main reason why the atrophy of the facial muscles does not happen. In most of the sources it says that it does happen, but it does not. Why? Because for the facial nerve, only the movement signals go from the brain to the muscles to the facial nerve. The sensory signals, or the signals of facial proprioception, use the other channel to reach the brain on their way back. This is the trigeminal nerve. With the Bell's palsy, trigeminal nerve is not damaged. So that's why it is very important to do the massage, so we supply sensory signals through the trigeminal nerve to the brain. One of the most common complications of the long-standing Bell's palsy is facial synkinesis. Synkinesis is an involuntary contraction of those facial muscles that are normally not involved in a particular facial movement. For example, involuntary closing of the eyelid during speech, smiling, puckering the lips, and so on. Another common complication is the movement of the mouth corner when the person closes, blinks, or squeezes his or her eyes. We will discuss synkinesis in detail in the next episode of our series.